I came across this extremely interesting idea, and I have been doing research because what else should you do on New Year's when you're bored out of your mind, waiting for midnight to happen? So, witch cult hypothesis. I was researching the origins of Wicca, and it came forth started in the early 1800s, not necessarily as the religion itself. The idea of the witch cult hypothesis started then, which led to the creation of Wicca, which is excessively interesting. It is a discredited theory that the witch trials were an attempt to suppress a pre-Christian religion that survived the Christendom of Europe. And that is a horribly interesting idea to me, especially already knowing what the witch trials were. They were destruction of Christian people for the sake of destroying the other team. Because that's what it always is when Christians kill each other. And most of the world was Christian. For the most part, if they weren't Christian, it wasn't public. The supposed cult revolved around a horned god, referred to by the Christians as the devil. This cult participated in nocturnal rites, the witches' sabbaths. There was that whole academic consensus that the cult never actually existed, which I have already said, which is basically because it was there. The original evidence for the theory was by the assumption that those killed were in fact witches, and that they had said that stuff that was actually truthful, rather than lies forced upon them. And by forced upon them, I mean they were being tortured. I mean, who wouldn't spit out a bunch of lies just to give them something to attack other people with if they're being hurt themselves? Because ultimate idea, survival. And that's basically what all of the hypothesis was built off of, as well as, like, the extreme details as to what the cult was doing took from various old pagan religions, like different practices just stuffed into it over time, slowly. The original idea, you know, not so much. It is a general belief that pagan cults had a lot of lost practices by the time they were in the Middle Ages, and during the 1800s, this whole witch cult hypothesis theory was adopted into fictional format in many different stories, as it is a happy idea, I guess. For some people, it's interesting. Now, to get this whole get something out of the way real quick here, Girolamo Tartarati, which in 1749, De Congresso Notturno delle Lamle, which it probably just butchered, whatever the hell that was, which means on the nocturnal meeting of witches. This dude, who's an Italian cleric, wrote that, and he claims that the stereotype for witches was influenced by pre-Christian folk beliefs, which doesn't actually state anything about the hypothesis. And Jacob Grimm, from, the Grimm Brothers thing, he's a German folklorist, in his Deutsche Mythology, which means Teutonic mythology, written in 1835, he claims that the witch stereotypes reflect pre-Christian folk traditions and connects medieval views of heresy with the folk traditions. They were both cited incorrectly, basically being accused of claiming that the witches had been members of a surviving pre-Christian cult, and I'm pretty sure that those two were probably not cited well simply because of, people who were wishing that they were saying that and they said stuff similar, and figured I'd get that out of the way first. Karl Ernst Jark is actually a real dude. I probably butchered his name too. In 1828, he started this whole witch cult thing as a scholar. He's a Catholic scholar from the University of Berlin. He claimed that the witchcraft was a pre-Christian religion surviving among the rural population and eventually degenerated into Satanism. This clears the church of killing lots of innocent people and for creating the construct of the devil. And he made many claims that frequently matched claims made by the threat of secret societies. So I'm not exactly sure that this dude is entirely credible to begin with. The next person that came forth with this witchcraft hypothesis, this witch cult hypothesis idea, is Franz Joseph Mohn. I don't know how to say his name either. In 1839, he claimed that the cult that degenerated in Satanism was not Germanic in origin at all. In fact, it had been practiced by slaves that came in contact with the Greek cults of Hecate and Dionysus on the north coast of the Black Sea. And he was also politically conservative and frequently matched claims that were made by the threat of the secret societies. And them both started this idea together, although they disagreed on how the cult, where the cult came from overall. So, interesting thing though, Moan was after Jark. Those are weird names. I like those last names. Alright. And then Jules Michelet, in 1862, was a French historian who despised the Roman Catholic Church and absolutism and believed in superiority of women. This person claimed that the witch cult had been practiced by peasants in opposition to Roman Catholicism. So, basically, the first dude's like, this is what happened, and the next dude's like, this is what happened, and the third dude's like, this is what happened. He claimed that most of the practitioners had been women who were great healers, who had held the basis for modern medicine, which probably nice, because healers are really awesome people. They're smart and intelligent and stuff, and generally had more knowledge. He also believed that they worshipped the god Pan, who had been put on equal terms with the devil by the Christians. And so, quite a delightful guy there. You know, hater of things, thinking these things. Granted, everyone hates something, you know? Then, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, an American women's suffrage member, published Women, Church, and State in 1893. She claimed that this happened in a completely different manner, because, you know, this happened, no, this happened, women says for the first time out of the four. I'm actually not sure about the genders of some of the previous one, like Jules, like what sort of name is that? Is that a girl name or a boy name? I don't know. Either way, she claimed that in prehistoric world, humanity had been matriarchal, worshipping a great goddess. And she claimed that the witch cult were priestesses preserving this religion. Completely, you know, interesting, you know. I think it would be really interesting if they were matriarchal. However, there is only one known society where they worshipped a, like, there's, like, matriarch, two, actually, where it was matriarchal, as far as I know. I mean, there's the one that was lost due to a volcanic thing, and they had images of this girl all over the place, and they can't read anything. And then there's the Amazons, and both of those are matriarchal. But other than that, most pagan things were patriarchal, so we already know this person is just an extreme feminist, because that's what feminists do. And she claimed that the witch cult were priestesses preserving this religion, this great goddess worship, matriarchal, all of humanity thing, which is cool. Next dude, Carl Pearson, a professor of applied mathematics at London University. He expanded Michelet's theory in 1862 and agreed there was a matriarchal society and believed it survived. He also thinks that it changed from being female worship to male worship during the Christian era, equating it with the devil. Joan of Arc was one of the last remaining priestesses of the religion, and he believed this religion to be primitive and savage, unlike the previous girl who obviously liked it a lot. And Michelet liked it a lot because he was an extreme woman lover. Because, you know, women are awesome. Way superior in his mind. And then another person who progressed the theory very slightly, Charles Leland, who is much more famous for his whole Aradia starter thing. He supported Michelet's theories. It was relevant because he mentions witches in context of them actually existing, and that didn't really happen in a way that was, like, you know, forwarding before the witch cult hypothesis theory. He makes mentions of the male deity Lucifer, a female deity, and the goddess Diana in his 1899 Aradia, or the Gospel of Witches, which is claimed to be a sacred text for Italian witches. It's a little bit of a stretch, I think, but he is frequently connected to this theory in a lot of different websites and stuff. You know, reading a lot. Margaret Murray is the most famous one and all person that got this whole thing kick-started, like, going forward. She is an She is an Egyptologist who could not work in Egyptian stuff because World War I got in the way. And all of her excavation sites absolutely, like, no. So she couldn't actually research it. So she had to work on other things, so she went around Europe researching other things, and when she finally got back to London, she decided to start researching witchcraft. Because, you know, it's an interesting thing. You know, witches. So she published articles and books and stuff, 1917, 1920. She used the term operative witchcraft to describe the performance of charms and spells with any purpose, and ritual witchcraft she used to describe the ancient religion of Western Europe, which also she considered fertility-based, and she coined as the Dianic cult. The cult devotes worship to a mother goddess and a male who at the time recorded during the trials superseded the goddess. There were admission ceremonies, and those who broke the rules of their secret book at the times were killed as traitors. It's a joyous religion with Sabbaths and Esbats, Sabbaths being purely religious and Esbats being for business matters, all ending in fertility and fun. No, prancy, wincy, sexy time. And there were, the rites were mostly designed for fertility purposes, and there were 4 types of sacrifices. I don't really get why, but they were the writing of the name in blood, sacrifice of animals, sacrifice of non-Christian children to ensure magical powers, and the sacrifice of their god himself to ensure babies. Somehow that makes sense. I don't get it. I don't get where the sacrifices came from. I haven't read the book yet. I think I should read the book. That would be so cool. The people in this tradition had 2 types of familiars, one being for divinatory purposes and the other being for domestic, so one for each type of ritual. And this mentions that fairies were in fact dwarves that lived in England and practiced the same religion as the witch cult. I'm not exactly sure how moving from fairies to dwarves makes it any more credible. I mean, unless they're going with the whole dwarfism disease, that would be so weird. Alright, because of her authority in the subject, she got to write a huge section on witchcraft in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it wasn't changed until 1968, despite all of the disputes. Granted, she died shortly beforehand, so, yeah. You know, the entire time living, I'm such an authority on this subject. I'm smartholes. Everyone loves me. I'm being excessively rude making fun of all of this because I am in a very, very sarcastic, I want to just make fun of things mood, which is really strange. She wrote The God of the Witches in 1933, which was similar material to her previous book and made for mass market production, removing sections from her previous works such as child sacrifice and any mentions of sex, as she didn't want people viewing the old faith as a bad thing. And she began referring to the male deity as the horned god and used gods from various pantheons to assert that this was practiced throughout northern Africa, Europe, and Asia all that time ago. This entire spiel about how everything was practiced became ultimately irrelevant because the entire bit of it was based off of what people said at the witch trials. And I really think that it was quite elaborately worked on, and I give her kudos and all those other people for building a ginormous story. And in the 1920s, 1930s, small secret groups started forming who based their religion off of these books that Murray published, because they believed it to be true and they wanted to practice it. And at the same time, there was also some family traditions starting up, and well, not starting up, but continuing. So there were multiple forms of paths of Wicca starting right about then, in the early 1900s. It's excessively interesting, and I love it, learning about the origins of a religion. So blessed be.